Welcome to the Plant-Centered and Thriving Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Kitchens. Welcome to the show. My name is Ashley, and today we are talking about a subject that is quite fascinating. We are talking about the relationship of the nervous system with the gut microbiome. So I have Nicole on the show. She is a recovered health perfectionist after a debilitating knee injury that led her to basically just re-examine her relationship with food and leave behind over a decade of severe food intolerances. She is now an integrative and functional nutritionist trained dietitian, helping people who are experiencing food intolerances using brain-based nutrition to expand what they can eat. Y'all, during this conversation, you may notice me I'm kind of geeking out. I'm wanting to ask Nicole a bunch of questions, and I feel like I could just chat with her for forever because a lot of what she's saying is just things that we don't talk a lot about. We know how important the gut microbiome is and how important gut health is and how eating a diversity of different foods and plants and how that builds a really healthy gut microbiome, but we don't really talk about the stress gut connection or how the nervous system affects our gut or how maybe what we've been told about food affects our gut or how our body handles certain foods that we eat. So Nicole dives into all of that for us. So if you're like me and you like nerding out about these types of things, I think you're really going to enjoy this podcast interview with Nicole. So please join me in welcoming Nicole to the show. Welcome to the show, Nicole.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I am too. I think it's always fascinating to talk with other dietitians who are experts in, your field, but also in one particular area. And I know that you are very passionate about gut health. We talked a little offline about constipation and all those great things that come with just like being a human being, basically. So
Yep, that's the one.
yeah. So before we get into all the details and nerd out over all the great things that you're going to share with us, just tell us a little about yourself and how you became a dietitian.
Sure. Thank you. So, the poop method, the title of my business, came to be because I had been spending years battling with constipation, but also anxiety and reacting to several different foods like brain fog and just like total fatigue. And so originally, I kept hearing things like eat more fiber and drink more water. And this was, of course, infuriating because at first, the first time I heard it, okay, I'll do it. And then I did it. I would have done anything to get rid of these problems. But after several years of hearing the same thing, and, I was doing everything I was told and nothing was changing, I was so frustrated. I was eating
Mhm.
more fiber, less fiber, less FODMAPs, more carbs, less carbs, more snacks throughout the day. I was experimenting with everything you could possibly do when it comes to what goes in your mouth. And so the message I was getting at that time was if I had perfected what I was eating, if I controlled everything to a T, then my problems would stop. And that's why I'm here, because it's just not true. It doesn't have to be that way. That is what I'm so passionate about.
And can you see why I had Nicole on the podcast? We have similar
Mm.
stories in like our struggles with constipation and just like trying to figure out, okay, wait a second. I'm telling my clients and patients to eat more fiber, drink more water, move their bodies. And I'm also doing these things, but they're not working for me. How in the world do I know they're going to work for my patients or my clients? And so I guess kind of explain to us what led you even further down this road of even starting to work with food intolerances and figuring out that there is more than just this blanket information, which I also received growing up of, oh, well, you just got to eat some more fiber and drink more water and you'll be fine.
Hmm. Yeah. So I have a name for this right now. I call it health perfectionism. Health perfectionism is when you're trying to get an A plus at being quote unquote, air quotes, healthy. And it could look like being super preoccupied with thoughts of food. It could look like being stressed out while eating, fearful about what you're going to eat next, doubts about whether you're eating the right food. But we're just kind of assuming that, oh, this is just what comes with the territory. I'm trying to be healthier. I'm trying to figure out how to help my body. And I guess this is just what I have to go through. So in my experience of health perfectionism, I was feeling like a different person. I was getting that brain fog I talked about after like everything I was eating. I was anxious, constipated, no energy, and it is impossible to maintain or even achieve, if we're being honest, this A plus at such a narrow view of what health is. So confining yourself to the house and never leaving is what I was experiencing. And the more people I've talked to, I see that they experience this as well in this kind of loop. And so I knew that there had to be something else that I could do because I had done all the things and there's no way I could live like that. So that is how I started looking for things other than just the basic constipation or gut health rhetoric. And what changed was that although I was at that time eating highly nutritious foods, my body was so stressed that my brain was primed to engage in this fight or flight system where it's just perceiving food as well as other things as danger. So food was becoming a danger signal for me. And that is what I needed to work on. So I needed to work on eating foods without having these beliefs that it was danger for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, because it sounds like at this point in your life, it was like food was not something to look forward to, or there was no joy really in eating. And it wasn't this like, oh, this, delicious food's going to nourish me. It's almost like it was like there was like some fear associated with it, or like this could potentially harm me, or it doesn't make me feel good, or I'm still like struggling with all these issues. So what the heck am I even doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's hidden stress, it's
Yeah.
these beliefs that about what you should or shouldn't eat. And that causes stress because you're trying to perform in a perfect way. Food at that point is like pass or fail. So you desperately are clinging not to fail.
Right. It almost reminds me of actually like going on a diet where you have these like really rigid rules, but it's not sustainable and it's actually more stressful than anything. And you're kind of in
Mhm.
this cycle of you're dieting, then you're not dieting, but then you feel like you have to go back on the diet again and it just never ends. It sounds like that's where you were kind of like just stuck in this loop. And it's like, well, so I guess the question is,
Absolutely.
how did you get out of it?
So to get out of it was this process of creating safety with food. So I'll be the first person to say that I've had a very privileged life. And I would have at one point said, oh, I never had stress. I never had like traumas. And so I just kept floating on. But understanding these hidden stressors and health perfectionism helped me to understand that, okay, you can have what seems to be a perfect life, but you can still have a brain that is constantly looking for danger. And so, what worked for me was being able to look for ways to create safety with food. And so they're small adjustments, but they make a big difference. And, I don't know if you want specifics right now, but why not talk about it? Mental rehearsal with food worked a lot, just reimagining what that experience is before you eat and after you eat, reimagining the way that your body is accepting and digesting that food. That's one of the things that can be easily overlooked, but makes a big difference when it comes to reprogramming your brain to feel safe with food.
Huh. So I'm going to ask you to explain that a little bit more because I'll be honest, Nicole, I've actually never heard that term before, mental rehearsal with food. So how do you go about doing that?
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Maybe that's a
Yes.
whole other episode, but please tell me because I'm really curious.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll go back and then we'll come back.
Okay.
So to understand food intolerance, you start by understanding that the brain has both conscious thoughts and unconscious thoughts. So conscious thoughts, you decide to clean up your house because it's messy. You're aware that that is a thought that you're having, and then you make a decision and you act on it. Then there's unconscious thoughts, which consist of the processes in the brain that occur automatically and affect outward expression of internal emotions. That's really key. So, this unconscious system has billions of nerves linked together, like mini little highways throughout your body. And when we do something, let's say we're doing a squat thrust, I'm sure you know that is like the farthest thing from an easy thing to pick up, right?
Mhm.
So a squat thrust, if you're listening, is this movement where you pick up a bar and you do a squat, and then you stand up and you thrust it over your head. So the first time you do that, you're very consciously thinking, okay, what do I do with my feet? What do I do with my hands, my eyes, my core? And you're consciously thinking about all these movements as you put them together. And then you make it happen. So then when you do it repeatedly, you create this well-worn pathway of these nerves that fire together very easily. And the action becomes automatic and unconscious. So you can do this movement now without thinking about your feet, your hands, you're just doing it. And so that's when it becomes unconscious. And so this is true for anything that becomes second nature. You've repeated it a bunch of times and you can almost just do it. Like if you drive to work, let's say, for the thousandth time, and you just kind of like show up there and you're like, whoa, I don't even remember this drive.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's because it's become an unconscious pathway, so you can just get there. So that system of unconsciously wired nerves in the body, it dictates our movements and our thoughts. And this is where behavioral conditioning comes into play, and it explains our food intolerances a little bit better. So nerd caps on.
Let's do it.
Nerd hats, put them on. Okay. So if you've heard of Pavlov, he's talked about a lot in these, I don't know if you've ever taken psychology in high school or in college. They talk about Pavlov, and he was known for studying these dogs. And so he would ring a bell, him and his researchers would ring a bell, and then they would feed the dogs. And eventually, the dogs associated the bell ringing with food, and so they would salivate whenever the bell rang, even if food didn't show up. So those dogs had associated this cue with an outcome, which was eating. So the bell with eating. And so this was a landmark study because we learned that the body would do things like salivating, even if it wasn't based on current reality. It's based on memory. So boom, then we link memories and the body, right? With body systems. So then we can look at fear conditioning. And this is what really links in the unconscious food intolerance. So if we have an unpleasant experience with food, such as pain from a past food experience, let's say you ate a food and it made you feel sick. A lot of people will know this to be true if they ever threw up while eating food and they don't want to touch that food again. That's definitely one I see a lot. So that could be one. Another one could be if you were on an intense restrictive diet in the past and it told you that XYZ food was the worst food you could possibly eat. That also is an unpleasant experience with food. Another could be just an intense fear from someone you trust telling you that a food is the worst food you could possibly have. So this could be someone in your life or someone on media. But those things can create food being associated with a danger cue. And so that unconscious automatic reaction when eating can be created. So it could be any kind of symptom. It could be bloat, constipation, which we talked about. It could be loose stools, brain fog. I've seen vertigo. I've seen arthritic-like symptoms. Really what you'd be looking for is that it happens after eating. Could be minutes, could be a few hours, but that's what you're looking for. And so with fear conditioning, just like the dogs who heard the bell and they had that unconscious reaction to salivate, food becomes that bell and the unconscious reaction is that symptom. And what makes the difference, why some people get it and why some people don't, is being in this heightened stress state, what would be called like a hypervigilant state. So the brain is in this state where it's looking for threats. And so it's a lot more common to be in this state now. Our body's really good at looking for threats, dealing with threats in a short term way, but long term, this is one of those things that can happen is the body is just like looking for threats, remembering those threats.
Wow.
So I guess I would love to say a disclaimer though,
Please, yeah.
knowing this. So I want to be clear that unconscious food intolerance is related to fear conditioning, but it is not conscious thought. This is so you can't think positive thoughts your way out of it because it is an unconscious level of thinking. So instead, we work on old food beliefs and create safety with food until safety with food becomes the new norm.
Hmm. Wow. And so have you even I know that you also work with clients one-on-one and you're an amazing dietitian. I mean, what kind of things have you even seen in your own clients? And you mentioned some of the things that you see a little bit, but I mean, how does this work in working with someone else? Because I would imagine this is a really challenging thing, not something that you can just fix in a matter of like a week. Like I'm sure this takes
Hmm.
time.
Yeah, it does take time. Definitely. And you can see, I will say, you can see significant differences. I've seen people do it in like just a few months, and some people a little bit more. What changes is the amount of time for the brain to decide that food is safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I, yeah, one client I just wrapped up with, we started working together when she had a list of like 5 foods, which is much more common than I wish it was. But so that was a result actually of food sensitivity tests and finding some advice that she shouldn't eat X number of foods. So she ended up with like only 5 foods that she would eat.
Those are the 5 foods that she could eat.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and she came wanting to expand those foods. She came wanting to eat more, but she was in a place where every time she would try, it just kept on,
Yeah.
the loop was still happening.
Yeah.
So she would still experience those foods.
Wow. How do they know the difference between like something they like can't tolerate versus something that is maybe conditioned or related to like thought processes?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great question. There is definitely a way that you can start working through it. So some of the experiences you want to look for are if you're scared to eat, if you are upset because other people can enjoy food in a way that you can't enjoy it, if you feel alone because you're on these restricted diets, or if you're exhausted or confused because your life is just revolving around food. Those are some of the experiences that I see. Oh, also knowing deep down that something is wrong, because
Mm,
you're going to present with these symptoms where there are these classic clinical ways of dealing with it. And if those aren't working for you, and you know that something deeper is going on, that's definitely something we can look at. And so to take it a step further, there's a thin line between, okay, is it a physical food sensitivity, which we could also call a food allergy, or is it an unconscious food sensitivity? And so the line dividing the two, and I know you had a guest speaking on this recently, is the immune system. And so, yeah, the immune system with food allergy or physical food sensitivity is engaged, and these IgE antibodies are present because the immune system is responding to that food. So the way that you can know if you have that is there are tests. There are tests at your doctor's office that you can get. Insurance will usually cover it. And these are things like lactose intolerance, celiac, EOS, where the body just really is not jiving with that food because usually something's missing to be able to digest it. So otherwise, it is then an unconscious food intolerance. And so they can actually be the same symptoms, like we were talking about, could be hives, constipation, brain fog, whatever you're experiencing. The way you know the difference isn't the symptom, it is by getting this test.
mm,
And so there's no real way of testing other than making sure you rule out a physical sensitivity, because we do have these tests, food sensitivity tests, we had just talked about how with food allergies or physical food insensitivity, they test for IgE antibodies. Now, the food sensitivity tests that are present, they test for IgG antibodies. And so I don't love these at home tests because IgG antibodies at this point in time aren't a reliable indicator of whether or not you are sensitive to this food because IgG antibodies are present even they're present even in small amounts with regular foods that you will eat. So something I know a lot of people have experienced is they'll get this test back and they'll have 30 foods that they're not allowed to eat anymore, according to this test. And they're thinking, I haven't eaten this food in years. Like, why did this show up? Or they're thinking, oh my gosh, like this is a staple food in my diet. Now I can't eat this. What am I supposed to do? So I don't love this diet. And by I don't love, I mean, I'd really recommend against it because the nature of the brain is to keep these negative stories anyway. So, and that's just a function to keep us alive, right?
Yeah.
So, if this data isn't reliable because actually we have these antibodies after eating food, period, and it hasn't been shown to actually prove anything about food sensitivity in the science, then we shouldn't use it because not only can it be unhelpful, but it can also actually work against our progress.
Yeah, it sounds like it's confusing, one, and then like you said, it's probably not even, or it might not even be accurate, and then here you are telling yourself, "I can't eat these 30 foods, or if I do, maybe they're gonna cause harm or some sort of reaction," and again, that goes back to, like, you associating those foods
Yeah,
with all these issues that may or may not be going on.
absolutely.
Hmm.
You hit the nail on the head.
Wow. So it's not to throw IBS under the bus, but it's kind of like it sounds like you're describing someone who like goes to the doctor, they have all these issues going on and they're really struggling. They've narrowed down their food to like this one person who had 5 foods that they could eat. They're given this like diagnosis, but they themselves know, no, this is so much deeper than just IBS or chronic constipation or brain fog or fatigue or whatever it is. And so
Mhm.
you go home, they take this test, but you're saying like there's more to it than this, much more to it.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I don't know if someone needed to hear this, but IBS in itself is just a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning that if someone doesn't know, if a medical provider isn't sure what's going on with you, they kind of give you this IBS diagnosis based on your symptoms, but they're not actually sure what is the problem. And so, what I am here to share as someone who was diagnosed with IBS at like age 9 and was looking for answers for way, way, way too long is that not that other ways aren't helpful. There are definitely some things that are helpful for some people. But this is another thing to add to the toolbox of what you can look for answers, where you can look for answers. That gut brain connection, the thoughts are so important because the gut microbiome is completely connected to the brain, right? And so a positive composition of the gut microbiome that can also support the brain, support eating foods without symptoms is also linked. So I do want to say that also working through this work of how your brain responds to food has a domino effect. It's multi-layered, your gut microbiome does see positive effects as well, composition wise. And oh my gosh, all the things related to digestion, better stomach acid, better peristaltic waves, like the whole 9 yards of like gut nerdism, everything sees positive effects from working on your brain's safety towards food. So, next step I love to give is it almost seems too easy, and I really implore you to do it, even if it seems easy. And it will start helping to weed out those painful symptoms, or at least get the ball rolling or plant a seed. And so I call it weeding it out. So looking through everyone you follow, every single person that is in your daily life. And this includes social media, podcasts, any shows you watch on maybe YouTube or TV or whatever your favorite streaming thing is. And look to see, is there anyone that A, promotes cleanses or fasts, B, promotes intense diet culture or dieting or restricting, makes you feel like your body, you wish it looked or functioned differently, or the earth is on fire people. That's what I call them, but there's always something that's going on, like they're in crisis mode, whether it's the food system or the water system or EMFs, or there's always something that's like a big danger to the world. So either cleanse these people out of your following, or so on IG, I know you can hide people if you feel like you don't want to unfollow them, if you feel like that's too much, then you can just mute their stories and posts. And then it's also very important with like what you watch. Everything that you consume when you're on social media or if you're watching something, you're in a primed state for things to go straight into the unconscious brain. So hold each person up to the light in a metaphorical way and say, do they fill up my cup or do they dry it out? And be ruthless about who gets to be in your circle, because it makes a big impact. I don't know if you've heard that saying, like you are the 6 people that you spend the most time with. That is really true. And so that is like the most important first step that you can possibly take. And one thing I will say, it could take out a lot of time. I know it did for me when I first did it. So maybe set like a timer for 10 minutes a day and just do a little bit of either weeding out or replacing a show that you once were watching with like a different show. So researching what you want to watch instead.
Yeah. Gosh, Nicole, I feel like you've given me a good challenge as well. So there's some things I can
Yay!
work on.
Everyone needs it, to be quite
Yeah.
honest. No one is out of that.
Yeah. It's a great reminder. So starting there, and why might that be important? Like just muting people or maybe just scaling back on some of the people that we're following or looking at or watching on a day-to-day basis. And how can that affect even like, yeah, how we're eating?
Yeah, so that's important because of the way that the brain, we talked about conditioning, behavioral conditioning, and fear conditioning, right? And so we also talked about how associating food with fear can happen when someone you trust um, says that, okay, this food is really bad for you. And it almost sounds too easy, like too obvious when we're talking like this. Your analytical brain right now listening to this is on, right? But when we're going through social media, a lot of the times we're in a hypnotic state where we're just like, very, our analytical brain is not on full mode. So it is definitely, a part of it is to make sure that you're surrounded by people who promote a healthy relationship with food, have a healthy relationship with food. Just that's, so if that's what you're looking to do, then that's what you need to be around. It's like if you're learning any skill or sport, the more people you're around that are acting in the way that you hope to be, that just like super speeds your journey there. So you will get to be that person just so much faster.
Mm, yeah, that's beautiful, actually.
Yes.
So where can we even go from there? If that's kind of maybe one of the first things that you recommend, maybe what are some other things that you recommend or do with your clients to help them work through some of this stuff as well?
So one of my clients actually came up with this. She was struggling with a particular food where she was trying to reintroduce it several times over, but just wasn't getting positive results, even though she really wanted them. So consciously, she was thinking, I'm going to eat this food, but unconsciously, her brain was like, not yet. And so what she found, she was going through those mental rehearsals, but she just wasn't seeing a difference. And so what she did actually was, instead of just a mental rehearsal where she was thinking about the experience of eating the food, she was actually reprogramming with positive experience with that food. So she was living out an experience where she was feeding her kids this food, and she was having a really good memory with it. And her kids used to love this particular food, and they used to like play with it, and it had all this positive memories for her. So she was reliving that positive experience with this food, then reliving, okay, this is how I'm going to eat mentally, eat this food, and these are the positive outcomes. So, another step that you could take even after that is to mentally rehearse or identify whatever your food is that you're trying to avoid or you were told to avoid. Think about what are the positive experiences I've had with that food, and then mentally rehearse that. And mental rehearsal really is just living through the details of an experience from start to finish. So there's been a lot of studies with like these piano players. I don't know if you've heard of this research study,
Mhm.
but yeah, they took two groups of piano players and neither of them knew how to, I believe neither of them knew how to play piano in the beginning. And with one group, they had them physically practice like on a piano. And with the other group, they had them practice mentally playing on the piano. And so what they found was that both groups were equally able to perform playing on the piano.
Wow.
Yeah, which is some crazy stuff. So,
Yes.
yeah, that really proved to us that, okay, we can practice things mentally and get similar impacts and outcomes. So you don't actually have to, okay, eat this food and then have a good experience to be able to remember having a good experience or have that good body experience with the food. You can just relive a past one you've had or reimagine one, and you get those benefits as well.
Hmm.
Really, what it comes to is that you are living each detail in detail. So I'm thinking about picking up the fork. I'm thinking about my surroundings. I'm thinking about what's on the plate, what else is on the plate. I'm thinking about the smells, using all your five senses from start to finish. And that's a good mental rehearsal.
Yeah, that's really neat. And I haven't heard of that study with the piano players, which is also really fascinating.
Yeah.
So
The
it
brain is a crazy thing, right?
so it sounds like it's helpful for, let's say, like one of your clients to rule out, okay, like I'm not truly allergic to this food. Like we've ruled that out. I've been maybe given the diagnosis of IBS, and then now they can come to you and kind of work on more of like the behavioral side of food.
So yeah, one of the things that is really good to just practice, and we Ashley and I talked about this before the program, so I wanted to make sure all of you know, is that one thing that is really helpful before you step into this work is to make sure that you know it's not a physical food sensitivity or food allergy, is that yeah, you go to the doctor and you ask for those tests. These days, a lot of doctors are testing for these. I think if you got your diagnosis maybe 10 plus years ago, then you would definitely want to go back to the doctor and ask, okay, can I get tested for celiac? Or um, they'll know what you're talking about when you go back and say, well, I hope they know what you're talking about when you go back and say, hey, can I get tested just to make sure I don't have a serious food allergy? And you should be able to get that good to go. But if you don't show up with also lactose intolerance, is one I see a lot. I don't know if they have a test at the doctors yet, but that's something that you can test by just like drink a glass of milk and then, the next day drink a glass of milk and take a lactate. That's one you can do really simply at home and see if you take the lactate with the glass of milk and you're good to go, then there's something to investigate there. But yeah, if you've been tested for those physical allergies and nothing's showing up, then you know that you can work on these unconscious food sensitivities.
Nicole, this was all so fascinating. And I was telling Nicole offline too. I was like, I want to know more. I want to keep asking you questions because this is something that just isn't talked about a whole lot. We hear a lot about gut health, and we know, and I know you know, listening, gut health is incredibly important, and incorporating a lot of variety into your diet is really helpful in building a healthy gut microbiome. But obviously, just in listening to Nicole, that can go so much further. And it's helpful to think about things that we don't think about like how stress affects the gut or how our nervous system affects our gut microbiome. So,
Hmm.
Nicole, with all that being said, thank you for coming on and sharing all this great information with everyone listening today. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I had so much fun being here. I hope whoever is listening gets at least one little nugget of knowledge out of this.
Absolutely. So if people are interested to learn more, if they want to connect with you, where is the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, so I am on social media at the poop method. While you're weeding everyone out, you can add me. And and yeah, just the poop method on TikTok and Instagram. That's the best place to find me.
Yep. Yeah. And now again, you can see why I had Nicole on because the poop method, it just spoke to my heart. All dietitians love
Yes.
talking about poop. So it's great. Yeah.
Yes, I was so happy when I changed to that name and everyone really liked talking about poop. So it
Yeah.
makes me happy, makes my
Yes.
heart sing.
Good. Well, again, thank you, Nicole. And thank you for tuning in today and listening to Nicole talk more about the nervous system and how it affects the gut and how we eat.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep thriving.